Welcome back to the show, everybody. My name's Andrew Gray. I'm your host. We are drawing near to the end of a season on the subject of soul tank management, the keys to avoiding burnout, which has been such a vital season for us to discuss such an important subject. And we're going to do a little more of that today. We've got a special guest on the podcast with us today. My guest name is Dave Barter. Dave lives with his wife and 3 children in the beautiful Blue Mountains west of Sydney in Australia. He's an author. He's an ordained minister, he's a business owner, and he's an expert in the field of mental health first aid. I know you're going to love hearing more of his story. Welcome to the podcast, Dave. It's great to have you with us today.
Hi, Andrew. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Excited
Absolutely.
to share what I can.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, for viewers and listeners, a little bit of disclosure. Dave and I have known each other for over 20 years now. And we've often talked about these subjects of organisational health. We've talked about mental health. We've talked about personal soul tank management and sustainability and all of these related subjects. And so Dave is a great guest for us to have on the podcast today so we can further unpack this conversation, a vital conversation to help people at whatever level, whatever place or context they find themselves in to do better in regards to managing their inner health. And so I wanted to start actually today, Dave, with the book you wrote. The title of your book is A Better Way. And I'd love it if you could just take that as your start point and talk to us about, number one, your motivation for writing it. And then number two, how you feel it applies to the world of organisational health. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So I wrote the book because I went through a pretty major burnout and breakdown a few years back. So basically I started to investigate what was wrong in my leadership and how did I get to where I was at with, obviously having all these mental health issues along with that and depression and anxiety and panic attacks and all that kind of stuff was happening. And I remember after getting through the initial kind of start of that and starting the road of recovery, I started to think about, how I could do things better in my life. And as a Christian, I felt God speaking to me about the need to be able to do that, and that there is a better way to lead and to run an organization, and so I started to look into that. So I wrote the book, and it's basically a lot of it's my story. It's my story on what I went through and how I and God helped me to process that and how to live more sustainable for the future. So the book I talk about things like having a mentor and the value of mentoring in my life. And obviously, Andrew has been a part of that process over the years. And so I found that to be really a key part of what the book's about. The whole book's about the journey of how I learned to become emotionally healthy, how I learned to have sustainable rhythms in my life, but also, how to then work that into how I'm running the organization, how I'm running the church that I'm running, and how to do that in a healthy way. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about these ideas of natural rhythms and internal health and sustainability. I wonder if we could take you back a few more steps even, because recently on the podcast, as you know, we've been talking about soul tank management, and I spent the last episode unpacking what we would call the mental health spectrum and talking about the general stages without trying to put a perfect science to it, but talking about the general stages that people can travel down on that spectrum. And what I did was I listed out as stage 1 being a stage of catalysts or kickstarters. In other words, there are many, many factors that can actually kickstart a person's journey with challenges around mental health. It's not a straightforward thing, and it's not something that can be brushed off with broad sweeping headlines or phrases. But could you maybe talk to us about that for a moment, apply it to your own personal journey? Talk to us about the journey into a challenge or navigating your own journey with mental health.
Yeah, so I've had probably nearly 25-year journey with depression, anxiety since I was a kid, and varying levels of degrees of severity. So I've always kind of had a bit of a history there with this, but I think coming into church leadership was a real eye-opener for me. I realized in hindsight that I didn't really know myself or who I was as a person. My identity was not solid. So when I came into the environment that I was in, there was a whole lot of pressure and performance culture around what I was doing.
Right.
Even in the early days of when I ran the first church I ran, I came into an environment that was very performance driven as a pastor.
Okay.
So that was when you don't know who you are and you don't understand how you operate inside and who you're meant to be, you then just fall into an environment and you then conform to that environment.
Yes.
So that's what happened to me, and I started to try and be somebody I wasn't, and I was trying to act in a way that I, wasn't designed or wired to act like. And
Yes.
you can only do that for so long before you burn the candle out, and then your life starts to fall apart. So that performance culture and that I had a deep-seated need for recognition and an unhealthy ambition in me that was just led me to a point where I couldn't sustain it any longer. So it was probably, I've been in ministry now in running church for 20 years.
Right.
And I would say, at least 13 to 14 years of that was unhealthy.
Right.
Then the back end of that obviously is where I've started to become more healthy and understand these rhythms that I talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people listening and watching will be fascinated and impressed by your honesty and vulnerability. But to me, it's interesting to observe that there seems to be a correlation between those who do navigate this journey well and their ability to be honest and to disclose to the right people, and as opposed to the converse of that, where people have a tendency to push down or suppress. They don't seem to do so well. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, originally I would push down and suppress.
Right.
And the problem with that is you can push it down, but it only stays down for so long.
Right.
And the only way forward, the only real way out of a mental health issue or, an emotional health problem or whatever it may be, is to open up and to be transparent.
Yes.
And so from that experience of having to open up, which is pretty hard to start with, to who do you talk to?
Yes.
I had all these concerns around, if I open up, will it all be over? Like, will my life be a failure? Will I lose my job? Will I, so there was a whole lot of question marks around, well, who's the right person to talk to? But the once you can identify that person and kind of discover, who's in your court, who's on your side, or, for your own personal understanding of that,
Yes.
then you can move forward. But you do have to open up. Transparency is like so important in this journey, because if you can't be honest about what you're going through, and normally it starts with yourself. I had to learn to be honest with myself,
right,
and to realize, hey, there's a problem here, and I can't deal with it. I can't change this. I need help, and then to reach out and be open and honest about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke on last week's episode around some of these Kickstarters and catalysts, and I talked about a number of obvious factors, but I touched on things even like, family history can predispose people, neurochemical imbalances. I gave a wide variety of factors that can be at play for a person when this mental health challenge starts, because I was particularly keen to dismiss any notion that to have a mental health challenge, or particularly when people progress to stage 2 of, depression and anxiety, I wanted to do what I could to dismiss this notion that it's just a person feeling flat and discouraged, and they just need to go to sleep and they'll be fine tomorrow. And so I tried to do away with that by expressing a wide variety of factors that are at play, because there really are a lot, aren't there? And I know that you've got experience in this field. What are you seeing as far as factors that contribute to people starting on this journey that they don't really want to be on? But what factors are at play that you're observing?
Look, I think a big part in the environment that I work in the church, is sometimes it's an over spiritualization of this whole thing that causes a problem.
Right.
So thinking that we can only deal with it in the spiritual realm, it keeps people in a place of denial. So of course we need to have that element addressed, but I think from my perspective, there's an unhealthy, what's the word I'm looking for? An unhealthy thinking around wanting to have a spiritual answer to something that needs a physical
Right.
assistance, if you like.
Yes.
So I see a lot of that, just unhealthy understanding of Scripture. And look, a lot of it's not from a place of malice or anything like that. It's more
Sure.
just people who are ignorant to how the word actually works. How do you actually
Yes.
find your way forward in this?
Yes.
And because there needs to be a balanced approach in that.
Yes.
So I see a lot of that in the church, but then also unhealthy rhythms in life.
Mm-hmm.
Poor sleep patterns, poor diet, poor physical, health, and so on and so forth. That just does not help the situation. Like we can't deal with it in one area. It's got to be dealt
Yes.
with in a holistic approach.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you say that because that it was one of the key thoughts I had last week was this idea of if you try to diagnose mental health in a silo, as it were, you're not going to come up with very good outcomes because the fact of the matter is the current journey of a mental health challenge may have kickstarted in a person's life by entering through a totally different prism. And if you don't accept the fact that holistic diagnosis is necessary, you can misdiagnose, as you just said, and then people tend to underestimate the ripple effects of what can happen, that it doesn't just stay quarantined. So not only does it not necessarily enter through your mental faculties, but nor does it stay quarantined in those places only, right?
Yeah, well, that's right. Like even for my experience, uh, it's it's a personal thing that's happening to me, but it's affecting my family, my kids,
Yes.
the way I interact with people at work. Like I couldn't sit in meetings, I couldn't
Mm.
operate. I was in a meeting, I'd get out straight away, so I didn't have to talk to you. So it's really got a broader impact than we realise sometimes. That this can't just it's not just one area. Like as in, I can
Yes.
deal with this by myself. Nobody will
Right.
know. But it does. It has an impact across the whole spectrum of life. So that's the nature of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We recently, as you'd be aware, we brought to the surface the awareness again of RUOK Day, which is a great initiative and I think
Yeah.
gets people having conversations. And one of the things that I have been pondering and reflecting on is whether or not we're actually doing enough and moving quickly enough in this whole arena of helping people with their mental health. And what I mean by that is I love the idea of RUOK Day, but
Mm.
I'm not sure that it goes far enough because I wonder how many people are actually asking it. And my quandary is, what are those people doing when their friend responds with, "No, I'm not okay"? I
Yeah.
wonder
Yeah.
how often that's where the conversation stops, which is it's nobody's fault in particular. And I'm certainly not down on these initiatives, but I do wonder whether or not societally, perhaps we're just ticking a box sometimes where we say, "Oh, yeah,
Mm.
I texted a mate and he said he was good or he gave me a thumbs up." And I guess
Yeah.
it is better than nothing because we're raising awareness, but I don't know that we're progressing as far or as fast as we should. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the whole idea of RUA Daycare is a great idea. I think you're right. Um, Awareness is super important, and something
Yes.
I'm working on a lot at the moment is just to bring
Right.
awareness around that mental health journey and struggle that a lot of
Mm-hmm.
pastors and leaders are experiencing, but there's not a lot of talk
Right.
about it. Um, but the reality is, like, this is how I've sort of progressed into mental health first aid. Was I was looking around for that next step. So, okay,
Mm.
it's great. Let's ask the question. We should ask the question because people need to be asked. Um, but the reality is, it can't stop there. We have to have resources to empower people to be able to help people. And
Yes.
that's where mental health first aid came in for me, because I was looking around and I couldn't find a course that I felt was really suitable. But when I came across
Mm-hmm.
this and I did the training, it's such an empowering course to give people step-by-step practical
Right.
information, resources, and skills to be able to help somebody in the moment of crisis, but also out of
Yes.
that moment to professional help, and walk
Right.
alongside that person, and help them. So, um, the more we can ask people, it's great, but we need to resource people with the right
Mm.
skills to be able to
Yeah,
have,
absolutely.
the right impacts that person needs in their life. So,
So
yeah.
take that a little bit deeper for us because, I'm aware of the fact that you have done training and you're certified and there's a whole body of work that's been created for people to get trained and to train others. But could you take that a little bit deeper for us? Put it in the context of how some of those skills and resources may
Yep.
actually be utilised, so that listeners and viewers can understand a bit more of what are the kinds of programs that are out there, and how everybody can benefit from getting more exposure to them.
Yeah. So basically, mental health first aid is pretty much the same kind of idea as a physical first aid training, right? So it comes with a 3-year accreditation, nationally recognised, and it's purely designed to. It's like the initial help offered to somebody who is experiencing a mental health crisis or mental health problem in their world. And so I would train people to be able to start the conversation with somebody. Hey, are you okay? Basically. And then when the information comes back, no, I'm not. Whatever's going on, I'm having a crisis. Then the training goes into how to help that person. So it'll be a conversation of, like, simple things like, do you want to move out of this space and into another room? What's going on? How can I help you? And then obviously if there's suicidal or those sort of ideology or thoughts happening, and then we would then seek professional help straight away. But we resource people to learn how to take a person from the crisis to the point of them being handed to somebody that's a professional, whether it be a GP, an ambulance officer, a hospital, whatever it may be. But we will be there on the journey right through to helping that person find the appropriate professional help that they need. So that'll include how to have conversations, what resources that the person that's helping needs, as in contact numbers, what is medication about. So we look at different medications for different mental illnesses. How does psychosis work? How does depression work? How does anxiety disorder work? How does alcohol abuse work? That kind of stuff. So there's a whole lot of information there that is so empowering for people to help them in that journey.
Yeah, it's an amazing resource, and those are the kinds of programs that I think are going to advance us further as a community, and the various communities where people are, that there's actual practical resources. I want to ask you a two-part question around that. Firstly, when we think mental health first aid, is the picture of the triage nurse at an emergency department a good metaphor, number one? And then number two, who is a typical person in a workplace that is suited to get this kind of training, or does it apply to anybody?
Yeah. So basically the training is for everybody. It doesn't matter what role they play in an organisation. It's actually good to have a wide berth of people from the organisation, if possible, from the CEO down, down to the guy in the in the mailroom. It doesn't matter, because the whole thing is you don't have to be like super educated or super intellectual to do the training and to engage somebody to help them. So it's open for everybody, and it's a training that will obviously impact the organisation in a way that reflects in financial gain as well. Obviously insurance companies really smile upon this type of training in your organisation. So
yeah, absolutely. And that picture, again, for listeners and viewers, that idea of an emergency department, the triage nurse, is that the kind of thing where we're proposing mental health first aid is, and what it looks like essentially?
Yeah. No, so it's not. It's the step before that. So you, as a mental health first aid officer, you're not there to diagnose somebody. You're not there to administer medications or anything like that. You're there to be a support and to assist them to find the appropriate professional help. So you're there as an encourager. You're there as somebody that can resource them and give them the resources they need in the time, or to help them action a plan. Because a lot of people that have a mental health crisis, generally it's been happening for some time in their life, and they already have a plan in place. They already have things that they can do. So it would be just helping them, okay, what is it you need to do right now? Most people know what they need, and they don't need to be even told what they need. They just need someone to come along and say, let me help you. So it's the step before the professional help comes. The goal is to get someone to that point, whether it be in the hospital or so on or so forth.
So it's a connector and facilitator type role.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's really important for us to specify that, because I think maybe one of the things that is a barrier to people getting more involved in this kind of training is the fear that they will have to make diagnosis and there'll be responsibility on their shoulders for the care that's given. But that's not really what we're talking about, is it?
No. So legally, I think it falls under the Good Samaritan Act. So it's like
Right.
physical first aid.
Yep.
So you're there to purely help someone, not, when I train people, I all the time through training over and over again, I'll say to people, we are not here to diagnose. We are not a doctor. We are not,
Yes.
anybody that has the skills. We're not trained in this, but in that level of diagnosis, but we are here to be a support. We are here to, walk along the journey with somebody and help them from their crisis into a place of starting their recovery,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. We will actually get to this in due course in today's episode, but I do want to just bring it up now as well, because you mentioned a couple of times there the training that you're currently involved in.
Yeah.
People who may be listening to this and are curious to get more information, maybe they own a business and want to have you engaged as a mental health first aid trainer. Tell us your website details and where they can get more of that information.
Yeah. So I have a website called A Better Way Life. So if you just put in abetterwaylife.com, it'll come up with my website. In that, you just click through. I focus on three things: awareness, training, and support. And if you in my website, there are those different categories. You go into training. There's 3 different training options in there at the moment. One is the mental health first aid. Another one is avoiding burnout, and another one is a mental health awareness. Each course runs for a different amount of time. So, yeah.
Great. Love it. As I said, we will make sure that's in the show notes for people to get a hold of. But I know that there are people all the time looking, whether they're individuals, whether they're small businesses, not-for-profit organisations, people are constantly looking for extra resources and ways to get help for their team and their staff. And rightly so, because as you touched on a few moments back, we don't often actually apply the truth of how costly in time and money and focus and productivity and all the rest of these things, how costly it is to have staff and team who are not entirely well. And we're certainly not suggesting that the financial cost should come ahead of people's well-being. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is that company owners and senior managers can take on a greater understanding that if they help their people to be healthy and remain healthy, everybody wins, including the company. There's nothing to gain from flogging people into the ground. Right. And then when they blow up, as they do, we just expend them as though they're some kind of commodity. It's not what we want, is it?
No, definitely not. I've been in environments like that, and it's just kills you. It's such a soul-wrenching experience to be part of a grind, you know what I mean? So I know for myself, I've had to relearn a lot of leadership skills to, work with people and keep in step with them and let them come on the journey of leadership, where before maybe I was a little bit hard and fast. So, yeah. And this mental health first aid training is, it's super, super easy to implement into your organization. It's not difficult.
Absolutely. It's interesting as you journey with people, and most of my listeners and viewers know that a lot of my background is on mentoring and helping people in this way and empowering leaders and organizations to get healthy and so on and so forth. But it's still interesting how many people are still learning to properly adopt and digest the importance of this stuff. I mean, just by way of example, I was with in recent weeks, I was with someone having a conversation, and this person, who I'm not going to disclose their name or their role, but they've been in a very significant leadership role in recent times. And as they were journeying through their own questions and concerns around mental health and soul health and all the rest of it, one of the comments that kept coming back from them was the importance of me being there to validate what they were thinking so that they didn't think they were totally off track and thinking all kinds of wild ideas and getting into that trap of, am I, just thinking the wrong thing and second guessing themselves, but actually to be there as a validator and say, no, you are on track. You need to get some support and help. Do you find that when you're having conversations with people that perhaps they're so entrenched in this bubble of the routine and the machine and just keep working that they actually need more help than we would think, even just to validate their concerns.
Yeah, I think so. I know from my experience, when you're in those environments, it's all about performance. It's all about producing. So so long as you're producing, nobody's asking any questions.
Yes, that's right.
And so you kind of live in this bubble of like, well, this is going great, but you're not addressing anything under the surface.
Right.
And so I do meet with guys, and sometimes I scratch my head a little bit and say, wonder what's really going on under the surface there. You know?
Right.
Like, it's fantastic you're seeing great things happen, but how's your soul? How's your health? You know, and
that's right.
Yeah, not everyone's open to the conversation, of course.
No, that's right. It's exactly right. Not everybody is open. Those who are obviously will advance a whole lot quicker. And in that regard, I want to pick up for a moment, if we can, this broader theme of soul tank management. And we both have touched on this idea of avoiding burnout and so on and so forth, the rhythms of life. And just give us some of your views and thoughts and insights around that broader subject, what you've experienced, what you've seen in others, what works, what doesn't, particularly when we are trying to get people to draw their focus inward and essentially give priority to the need for a healthy inner life and becoming sustainable.
Yeah. Look, I was thinking about this whole idea earlier today, and the fact that I think it boils down to, for me, like self-awareness. Learning to ask yourself the right questions is super important. You know, not just how do I feel, but why do I feel the way I feel, and what is underneath that, and causing that to be an issue. So I would say, like, that's an ability not everybody has learned how to do, and if they have learned to do it, they possibly haven't learned how to find healing and wholeness in that, to to find that place where that wound is healed or that problem is dealt with. So I find that to be like one of the keys I found in my experience, is to become self-aware, and to really start to be, a little bit like Terminator, being self-aware and knowing knowing who you are, and investigating these things that sometimes we push down and don't really look at, So so that's definitely an area I think would be super important for people to start at. Because once you ask yourself the right questions, you can find the right answers and the right people to bring those answers into your world. But when you're not asking the right questions, you're never going to find your way forward. So
yeah, exactly. I think sometimes as well, people they get so entrenched in just getting from one day to the next. Sometimes they don't look up for long enough to be self-aware, as you're saying, or there are other pressures around them that make it difficult to stop and think about these thoughts. And it often comes as a huge shock to people, I think, or a surprise revelation, as it were, to understand that they may be unhealthy. And then I have found that the further they travel down this journey of trying to become healthy, it becomes quite shocking to them how actually unhealthy they've become over a lengthy period of time, either because of the context they work in or the family they grew up in, or a combination of both. And do you find that? I mean, I know in your context, you often work with ordained ministers and people in the not-for-profit sector, but all of the contexts you're in, do you find that people have a little bit of a journey where perhaps there's even a dip down to start because they realize, wow, I really need to get to work on this, and they feel like they're overdue?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you start looking at, your soul, and you start looking at your own personal health in that area of emotional health, you start to see how bad you really are. And it can be a little depressing, to go, wow,
it's a bit frightening, scary, right?
Yeah, it could be scary. And you think, look how I'm really down here. I didn't realize it was so bad. And I know that was my experience. But the beauty of that is once you have that awareness of, okay, you now know where your starting point is. And from there you can start climbing, you can start moving forward. But there is that initial like shock, if you like, and awe of like, oh wow, this is not good at all. And it's normally why somebody's starting to look into this area, because they're starting to experience something that is not right in their world. Yeah, so definitely I think, there's an initial shock, but then you can get about 12 months down the track and you look back and be amazed at
That's
how
right.
many things have changed and how much
Yes.
healthier you are. And even the fact that you might be sleeping better and you might actually have a better relationship with your spouse. And,
Right.
because you've actually got more margin in your world to create that
Yes.
rest that you need. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I in an earlier episode in this season, one of the things we talked about was the idea of warning signs that come to people, and I want to use that analogy in a moment to parlay into a couple of questions for you. But I talked about this idea that there are degrees of warning signs, and I spoke about the fact that in the metaphor of a car dashboard, you
Mm,
get the orange light fuel warning, which it's an expected warning sign. You don't get upset when you see it, well, except for the price of fuel these days, but you expect that light to come on, right? And it's saying,
yeah.
take a stop, do some refuel so you can keep moving. But then there are greater degrees of warning signs like an oil light or an engine
Mm,
warning light or an electrical fault. And there's all these
yeah.
grades of warning signs. I'm wondering maybe, first of all, on a personal level, and then secondary, we'll get to it on a company or organization level. If people are listening and they're starting to get a couple of little concerns and worrying about themselves, on a personal level, what would you say to people are some of the warning signs to be looking out for in regards to declining mental health?
Okay. So, my experience, like right now, I've got a van, right? And I know it's leaking oil, but
Hmm.
the oil light hasn't come on yet. But I know it's coming on.
Right,
It's going to come on at some point, right?
right.
So what I realized with mental health is a little bit like that. It doesn't always, like, it's not this great outpouring where the light comes straight on. There's more of a little
Mm,
trickle of things
yes,
happening that are dripping, and the light's not on yet, but there's stuff happening
yes.
that we need to be aware of. That and some of those things are just really simple things, like,
Hmm.
you know, not being able to turn off in the afternoon after you get home from work. You're constantly on your emails, constantly doing things,
Okay.
constantly working at work, even though you're meant to be home with the kids or the wife or
Yes.
your spouse or whatever. So that can be a real telltale sign. I found for me, my self talk is where it normally begins.
Okay.
The trickle in
Okay.
my self talk of just negativity slowly seeping in,
Mm,
but not big stuff, but just little things like questioning myself or a bad opinion of myself about something that took
right.
place, or so that I find that starts to intensify, and
Hmm.
as that trickles away, it gets worse and worse, and then by the time the light comes on, it's actually a little bit late, um, because I
Mm,
should have been picking up on the signs earlier.
yes.
Look, it's one of those things for me. It catches me out quite often,
Hmm.
especially in my thought life. That my mind can spiral down quite far before I realize what's actually going on.
Right.
And I think that's a big area for all of us, to
Yes.
capture that negativity and really see it for what it is, and don't think it's just going to
Yeah.
go away,
Hmm.
and ignore it, because what we like to do is put our head in the sand and hope
Yeah.
that things will change so we don't have to go to the doctor or we don't have to tell somebody.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you've couched that, the idea of a warning sign before a warning sign. The
Yeah.
idea that on your own van, that there's an oil leak. And so sooner or later, there's going to be a warning light. And you can either
Mm.
do something now or later. And probably what you've got to do later could be more than what you've got to do now. I think that's a really great piece of practical advice for people listening and watching, that you don't have to wait for serious warning signs, but you can actually pay attention to those little trickles, as you worded it, or little slow leaks in our sleep and our nutrition and
Mm.
our behaviors, and then into things like, am I not switching off at the end of the day? And
Hmm.
am I starting to get more irritable than usual with the family? All these little slow leaks, as it were. I think that's great practical advice for people to utilize.
Yeah.
Talk to us about a person who is perhaps a little further ahead on this journey. They've begun to understand all of these factors about good mental health and sustainability and healthy inner life, and they're beginning that journey of really trying to build that framework. What about
Yeah.
if they're finding themselves in a workplace,
Hmm.
or they're contemplating entering a workplace? What are some of the warning signs that we would advise people there to be on the lookout for? What are the kinds of traits of unhealthy cultures or leadership environments that may actually become detrimental to a person's positive journey in this stuff and potentially send them in reverse?
Yeah, I think the whole idea of the water, where you go to get water at a business, like, or in the tea room, what do they call those? The water fountain or whatever you want to call it. And there's always conversations around that space. So if you want to know what an organisation's like, just hang around the tea room around guys that are just chatting, and you'll hear the culture. And so sometimes, you can talk to, say, the boss, and he's got a great picture of what he feels the business is like. But if you really want to get to know the culture of an organisation, just have some conversations with the guys further down the ladder. And just listen to what they say about the place, why they're there, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. You often find a common thread or a common theme that will come out. Obviously, you always got some people that, have just got an issue or whatever, but the general consensus you'll get from the other staff members is always interesting, and a good way to show you an indicator of what's going on in that organisation.
Yes. What would we say? I love that. That's a great way for people to lean in and listen to the language, right? Because that's that's revealing what's on the inside of the place. What about a scenario where perhaps people are already in an organisation where maybe they're what we would call middle management? What if they see some troubles below them and some concerns about the impact of those above them? How would we advise a person to navigate that journey? Because they're not necessarily the cause of, unhealthy philosophies or what have you, but they have empathy for the impact that it's having on other team. What would we advise that person to be doing?
Yeah, look, I first and foremost, I think, making sure the team under them is okay, that people are, the mental health of the team is okay, that people are actually doing okay, or if they're not, that they've got the right support structures around. Obviously, in our day and age here in Australia, we've got legislation around work cover and all those sorts of things if people aren't doing well, that they can access. And then sharing those concerns with upper management, in a way that is not judgmental but in a way that's very clear, that these are the experiences of our staff members. You don't need to name people, but there is an unhealthy environment happening here, and we need to address that and bring it to their attention. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, you can only do so much if the upper levels of leadership don't want to bring change. Then what you'll probably see is people starting to leave and starting to move on, because they just can't, live in that culture in a workplace and feel that they can sustain their life properly.
Absolutely.
So you would hope that upper levels of management would listen and would want to make sure that their staff are, because no organisation wants a higher turnover. But if we don't address these issues, then what's going to happen is a high turnover of staff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, look, I think it's, as you say, it's the kind of thing where, regardless of the industry sector, organisations that take that blasé approach of, we don't care, or people just need to get over it, or what have you, I do think that is going to expire sooner rather than later. I was reading a statistic just a couple of months ago where an Australian survey was conducted. It's within the last 12 months, so it's a current stat. And out of all of the respondents, quite a large sample size actually, 83% of the respondents said that they believed it was at least partially the responsibility of their employer, and some of them fully, but at least partially the responsibility of their employer and their workplace to create resources and provide for the health and well-being of the employees, which is fascinating that people are already thinking it, even if they're not necessarily experiencing it.
Yeah. I know in the church, there's now policy coming out that's telling church leadership that we have to create psychologically safe environments for our parishioners and people that are coming to church. And so this training has become, obviously the mental health training has become, key element in implementing training and resources into the church to make that become a reality.
Yes.
Because the reality is we can have all the policies in the world, but if we're not willing to
Sure.
actually action things and put in
Yeah.
place some really good, solid training so people are resourced properly to deal with these situations,
Yes.
then, like you said, that whole get over it culture is just going to expire.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it probably
Yeah.
already has, really.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think there are a few still maybe holding on to it, but the majority of people now have become a lot more aware of the environments they're in and whether they want to be a part of that or not.
Yeah, that's right. As you say, I think there is still a proportion of it going on. It typically only goes on where it's allowed to.
Yeah,
I don't think there's many people anymore at all who see that it's acceptable to lead or manage in that way. But where it still creates some measure of productivity and it's allowed and not challenged, it still exists in those places. But I think as that water level of challenging those unhealthy practices, and the crazy thing is, they create less productivity. That's the
yeah,
wild thing about it in organizations, that not only is it detrimental to the individuals on the receiving end, but it actually hurts the company bottom line, as it were. So not only is it unhealthy and uncaring leadership, it's unwise leadership because it's not actually helping. So I
mm,
do agree with you. I think there will be a natural expiration date to it. I want to just dive into one more little mini sector of our conversation here before we run out of time. And it sort of goes to this idea that I was talking to a friend recently, and somehow we got onto this idea. He actually mentioned that he had heard that around Australia, there were lineups and waiting lists anywhere up to 9 months for people to be able to see a local psychologist.
mm,
And that turned into a conversation around how there's an emergence or a renaissance of going to see counselors and people just looking wherever they can find it. And essentially, there was a twofold truth to this statistic that, number one, we're not seeing enough people in these fields being trained and coming through into professional places. But also, I think the greater factor here is that there is an increasing rise still of families, individuals, people who just are struggling with their journey of life, and particularly in the headspace. So
mm.
let's take a minute or two maybe to talk societally about what's going on there and the drivers behind that. And, with all this new awareness, and on one front, we apparently have a lot of change going on. And yet on the other side of that same coin, for reasons that are not good, we clearly see a surge and a demand for these kinds of services because people are not feeling well in themselves. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think COVID's been the trigger here that really ramped
Mm,
this up. It was probably there before, but I think what COVID did was put it on steroids and make it become bigger
right.
than it was very quickly.
Yes.
And it's caught the industry unprepared
Mm,
to some degree because obviously we don't have enough psychologists and whatnot out there to
yes.
service the need. And the cost has gone up too, of course.
Yes.
You can pay anywhere up $270 for a consultation. So, yeah, there's a desperate need out there.
Yes.
My obviously being a church leader, I see the opportunity for the church to fill the void.
Mm,
And for people that don't go to church, they maybe don't understand the value of what the church and what ministers and leadership of a church can offer to a community. And
mm-hmm.
one of those things is to offer a safe place where people can come with just as they are, and
Right.
build relationship, and break isolation, and
Yes.
find an environment where they can be accepted, even though they've got problems.
Yeah.
And churches, traditionally that's a church. That's what churches do. They accept people in and they help people on the journey of transformation and
Yeah.
change. And so, like I know with my church up here in the mountains, we regularly get people that come in with mental health issues,
Right.
whether it be schizophrenia or anxiety or depression,
Mm-hmm.
and we just accept them for who they are and
Right.
have the conversation with them and start the journey of them not needing to pay someone to
Mm-hmm.
be able to talk. And of course, we
Yes.
don't have all the skills on, you know,
Sure.
someone with schizophrenia. We don't have all the skills to help them, but we can be a listening ear. And I
Yes.
think if we just we're able to sort of implement friendship in our world. So what the world's done is getting a whole lot more isolated. A whole lot more people are separating from each other, and there's just a great void in people's worlds where they're not got deep friendships anymore. And sometimes all you need is a good mate, or a good friend. And especially for guys, girls seem to get this a bit easier, women, but they're a lot more emotional beings and they connect in that way. But for guys, we want to be stoic. We're men, especially in Australia. We're an Australian man. Australian men don't cry, apparently. And and so, and I've dealt with guys in that situation who've had to work through just that one concept that, oh, well, I'm an Aussie. I don't cry. I don't have emotions, and helping someone through the journey of realizing, well, you know what, you actually do. And
that's right.
This is why you're going through what you're going through. Let's have a conversation. And those guys haven't needed to go to a psychologist or counselor. They just needed someone to listen. So
absolutely.
I would encourage people that maybe are listening and, you do have a bit of a thing going on where you're struggling. Just find somebody in your world that you trust. And start there. And, if you need to go find professional help, well, maybe that will be a good bridge till you can get to the point where you can see somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, I take that point and I love that point that often what people need most, or what they need as their start point, is that sense of community, places like churches, but there are other places as well that might be more within people's reach to begin with. That sense of belonging, because there is so much isolation, there's so much fragmentation. And I think you're right. The COVID period definitely accelerated what was already perhaps dormant in people with their struggles and their challenges, and it kind of flushed it all to the surface. And now there is this pent-up pipeline, as it were, of people who are suddenly aware, I need support, I need help, and the system that phrase we like to use, is not really coping with it. Dave, I want to give you one more hypothetical question. If we could imagine that we could give you some kind of megaphone or broadcast capacity to talk to the whole of the country, which would be everybody's dream come true, right? You could speak to everybody for a couple of minutes, and you could get a message across. If you had the chance to do that for a large body of people, first of all, what would you be saying to people who perhaps don't feel like they've got poor mental health presently, but they want to be wise and not go down that pathway, and the people who know that they actually have tipped over the line a little bit and they could be in dangerous waters? What would you say to those two types of people if you could speak to them all today?
I think my greatest encouragement would be to not rest on your laurels. Like, don't just do nothing because you feel okay. Because there are a lot of things we can do, even when we're feeling good, that will prepare us for the days that we may not feel so good. And we have to understand the whole mental health spectrum. It's a sliding scale for your life. You can have really good mental health and then go through some trauma or some situation and find yourself down the other end of the scale and need to move back up again. So I would say that, at the end of the day, all of us have a mental health area that we're sitting on that scale. And well done if it's at the good end. That's fantastic. But don't think that it'll stay there if you don't address the simple things like sleeping, your diet, all those elements, and having good, healthy relationships in your world, exercising, all that kind of stuff. And then for someone that is actually struggling, my encouragement to them would be, you've got to break the silence. You've got to start talking. You've got to start reaching out. Depression, the nature of depression is isolation. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to leave the house. You don't want to talk to another person about this. You don't want another person to ask you how you're going. But the reality is, if you lock down and just push it within, it's only going to get worse. But if we start talking about it, then things are going to start heading in the right direction. So I would encourage that person to break the silence, reach out, find somebody, even if it is a GP, find somebody you can reach out to. My encouragement would be, if you are struggling, your first port of call should be to a general practitioner. Go and see your doctor. Go and get the checkups that they need. They'll do blood tests and all that. But
Yep.
and then they can direct you in the right, course of action as well. So
Yes.
I guess that would be my major thing: is break the silence, start the conversation, and don't rest on your laurels. Don't just think it's all going to be okay forever. We've got to be on top of this stuff because it can change overnight. It did for me.
That's right. Absolutely. It's fantastic advice. And as you say, so important for everybody to realize it is a sliding scale. And you might not feel like you need a lot of this stuff today, but you could need it tomorrow. Or someone you care about could need what you've learned from today. So it is great advice. I will make sure for everyone watching and listening that Dave's website and his book and links to his training and all the rest of it are in our show notes so that you can access that, learn some more about it. It's been great to have you on the podcast today, Dave. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been so cool just to share and be a part of this. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an important subject. Soul tank management, keys to avoiding burnout, understanding the mental health spectrum, getting your toolkit, as it were, broader and deeper. So important. I've got another great guest interview coming up on next week's episode, and I'd love you to tune in for that. If you're enjoying the podcast, why don't you go ahead and share it with a friend, especially this season, and subjects like what we've talked about today could definitely help somebody else that needs to hear it. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, bye for now.